And another number that we're very careful about communicating, I really need to stress that in row F, this is our currently offline capacity. If you can envision, we have over 200 buildings, 50 water treatment facilities. They're going offline and coming online every week. We have to do asset renewals, well rehabs, capital upgrades, and we have emergency shutdowns. So that's a highly fluctuating number. So you see in brackets there, I've said today. So today, as of February 25th, we have 208 liters a second offline. So if I take that off of our sustainable capacity, that leaves us with a today's sustainable capacity, February 25th, 1,247 liters a second, which leaves us in a deficit. So our current operational resiliency would be minus 97 liters a second, or minus 6.7%. The obvious question when you see that we're in a deficit is, why was I able to take a shower this morning? Why are we all drinking glasses of safe water from the region of Waterloo? And the answer is we have peaking capacity. So we have about 380 liters a second of additional capacity that we can use to peak to meet our maximum week demands, unexpected demands like water main breaks. But typically we would see that being used in the summer, not necessarily on a frigid February day when the aquifer should probably be resting. And that is a state we have been in, as we saw in the Agile report, for the last 3 years. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the risks of peaking, and this is where I hand it over to a hydrogeologist to talk about the hydrogeological aspects.
Thank you, Ryan. Through the chair. So as Ryan alluded to, for the past 3 years, based on the information presented in the Agile report, we've been taking more water out of the ground than what is sustainable. So we've been in a state of peaking or overpumping for 3 years. And that's a state that you don't want to be in for an extended period of time. We want to use our peaking supply to deal with our peak demands for weeks or months at a time, preferably not years. So one of the questions that I do keep hearing is, well, we've been doing this for the past few years, can't we keep doing it? And we have to drill down into what we're observing in the natural environment to help answer that question. So the two plots that you see on the screen in front of you right now are from monitoring wells that are located in our Mannheim West well field. What you see is the blue lines on the top that are kind of bouncing around a little bit. Those are water levels that are actually measured in our monitoring wells. The red dashed line that you see below, that represents a trigger level that exists on our permit to take water. This is a trigger level that's established, required by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. And this trigger level was established with the purpose and intention of protecting private water supply wells that are within the vicinity of these Mannheim well fields. So what you can see is starting in approximately, it's a little hard to see, 2021, we start to see a downward trend in water levels within this part of the Mannheim well field. And we start to get really close to these trigger levels. And what that means is if we're going to cross that trigger level, we have a much higher degree of risk that we're actually going to cause interferences to private wells, lowering water levels or potentially drawing them out to the point where they can't be used. So it's an important level. It was established through scientific investigations, and it's required by the province. So we try to stay above that. We haven't breached these trigger levels in the Mannheim area, but we're getting close. We actually had to make an operational adjustment just a few weeks ago to turn off our best production well, K26, because we got too close to one of these trigger levels. So we backed off the pumping in that area to allow the water levels to recover a little bit so that we could safely resume pumping a few weeks later. So it's an example of an actual operational adjustment that we had to make on the fly to reflect the fact that we have declining water levels in these aquifers. So that's not only peaking capacity, we're now talking about sustainable capacity where we actually had to back off during the winter months. In addition, when your water levels drop like this, close to that trigger level, now you have a very low starting point. So maybe we can still sustainably take at certain rates, but now we've lost the ability to really pump hard when we need it, when our demands are higher during the summer months. So The question is, what's causing these water level declines? And I'll ask for the next slide, please. This is going to end up being a very noisy slide with a lot of lines on it, so there are several transitions. So I will start by explaining what you see on the screen in front of you, and then we will see more lines be added as we go through. The first line that you see, the top black dashed line, that represents the sustainable capacity that we can take out of all of our Mannheim well fields combined. That represents approximately 325 liters per second of water that we can sustainably take out of the ground from these well fields. Next, please. This line represents our annualized pumping over the past 20 years. So there's two different vertical axes that you can see on this plot. When we're looking at this pumping data, we're going to look at the right side of the plot to tell us how many liters per second on average we're taking out of the ground on any given year. So that 325 liter per second line, you can see the green line, how it's bouncing around below and above. So I want to focus in, and I'll get you to do the next click. Yep. So when we look at this annualized pumping data over this 20-year time period, we notice three really distinct periods. So from 2005 to 2010, we see a definite decreasing pumping trend for that 5-year period. Then from 2010 to about the year 2022, we see a gradual increasing trend in the amount of water that we're pumping from these Mannheim well fields cumulatively. Towards the end of this period, we start approaching the 325 liter per second sustainable capacity. And then in the year 2022, we see a steeper inflection representing an increase taking, once again, above and beyond the gradual trend that we saw for the past 12 years. And that last 3 years represents pumping above that 325 liter per second sustainable capacity, about 25% higher. Next, please. These lines that you see on here, these are water level data that are collected from monitoring wells at our ASR well field that's at the Mannheim Water Treatment Plant property. It's pretty noisy, but if you click one more time for me, we can add a trend line. And this trend line helps us kind of discern the trends over these same time periods that we were seeing in pumping. And what I'm going to do is get one more click, and I'm going to take off those lines so we can just look at the trend lines because it's really noisy with all those other lines on there. So from 2005 to 2010, where we have these declining pumping trends in the Mannheim well fields, we actually see an increasing trend in water levels in the aquifer. So it's the inverse relationship. The less pumping we do, the higher the water levels go in the aquifer. And on the left side, on the vertical axis, that is our groundwater elevations in meters above sea level. So that's what you can compare the water level data to. Then from 2010 to 2022, during this period of gradually increased pumping over a fairly long time period, we see a gradual decline in aquifer levels in this well field. Then you can see from 2022 to 2025, where we had the steeper increase in pumping, we see a steeper decrease in groundwater elevations in the aquifer. And now I want to flag the orange line, the solid orange line that you see at the bottom. And this is representative of 330 meters above sea level. It's a really critical elevation for us when we're looking at the ASR well field in particular. So as you can see on the right side, right at the end of the data set, the black trend line has crossed or just gotten to that orange line. The orange line is kind of a warning sign for us. Under non-pumping conditions, that means we only have about 2 meters of water column to start with before we even turn our wells on. Once we turn our wells on, that's a very small amount of water that we can actually pull down before the well is dried out to the point where we can't use it anymore. The red dashed line that you see below the orange line represents the top of the well screen, and that you can't bring the water level any further below that. So when we ask ourselves, what's the cause of these declining water level trends, this data set really shows a smoking gun that our pumping is influencing water levels in the Mannheim aquifer. And what happens if we cross that orange line and we go too much further is we start to risk the potential that we could lose ASR wells, so losing supply wells if the water level trends continue to go down over time. So it's not going to happen to all of them all at once. There's slightly more water, slightly less water in some of them, depending on where they're drilled and the geology, but you start to run the risk of losing them one by one. So the question is, can we keep doing this? And data sets like this, to me, suggest that we probably can't do this for much longer. We're in a period where we want to start resting our aquifers in this area to watch the water levels rebound to give us more of that sustainable capacity and more of that peaking potential for the summer months. And the other question that's been asked a lot is, well, how long can we actually peak our system for? Well, when we see our water takings that are 25% or so above what we deem to be the sustainable capacity, we're really only getting 2 or 3 years out of that before we really need to back off. So I would say this is not a long-term solution to continue peaking. We're at a point where we really should be backing off and letting things rest, letting the aquifers return to better water level conditions. This isn't happening everywhere across the region. This is very localized in the Mannheim area, and we've had to do a lot of very focused pumping in the Mannheim area because we've had other major urban well fields offline for extended periods of time, such as Parkway, such as Greenbrook. We had William Street offline for a number of for more than a year as well. So we've had to really lean on these Mannheim aquifers and these Mannheim wells to get us through, but probably for not too much longer. If you can move to the next slide, please. This is kind of a visual because not everybody is a hydrogeologist and likes looking at water level trends and pumping data trends. So I wanted to bring this into more of the real world, cartoonized kind of graphic. So what you see, this would be like your starting conditions. You have a well that can produce sustainably 25 liters per second of water, and you'll note that the water level is some height above the top of the pump. And that means you can pull it down. You can pump it harder for a short period of time, pull that water level down right to the top of the pump. So you could probably peak it at 35 liters per second for a short period of time, even though you can only sustainably long-term take 25 liters per second out of it. Next, please. Back one, please. Back two, please. And forward one, please. Forward two, please. Back one. Okay. I'll just limp along like this. So the second line that you see, it says sustainable 25 liters per second, peaking 25 liters per second. So let's assume we've been in a state of overpumping for a year or so. And what we've done is we've kind of lowered the water level in the entire aquifer. And what that means is when we're sustainably taking water at 25 liters per second, now we lower the water level down to just above the top of the pump. So that doesn't leave us any peaking capacity left, because if we pump it any harder, then it falls below the pump and we break suction and we can destroy the pump that way. So sustainably, we can take 25 liters per second still, but now we've lost peaking capacity. So our peaking amount is the same as our sustainable capacity, only 25 liters per second. Then if we continue in a state of overpumping, what we do is we start lowering the water level even further, and in order to avoid the water level dropping below our pump, we actually have to dial back our sustainable taking. So now our sustainable supply becomes 20 liters per second. The peaking is identical, only 20 liters per second. And if we keep going that way and we overpump on a cumulative basis from a number of well fields, next slide, please. Previous. What we end up doing, if we're pumping cumulatively from a number of well fields, is we can lower the water level to below the top of the pump. In this situation, we've lost the well. This is what we're trying to avoid from happening at the ASR well field. But this is what happens if you overpump for too long. You can start to lose wells. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan.